All right, we are live. Well, welcome. Happy Friday to those of you who are catching us live. This is your host, or I'm your host, Sabine Gideon, the host of She Leads Now podcast. And I am excited to bring you another installment of the PowHer of Money series. And not only is this, set to be an amazing conversation, but it's also the last conversation in this series. And so no pressure to our guest, although I know she will not disappoint. But nonetheless, let's go ahead and get started. If you are catching live, go ahead and say hello in the comment section on whatever platform you're watching live. Be sure to ask questions if you have questions of either myself or Kristine, and we'll be sure to get those answered. So without further ado, I want to introduce this amazing powerhouse. So Kristine Beese is the CEO of Untangle Money and helps women reduce their anxiety and gain clarity about their money. With over a decade of experience in the finance industry, Kristine shares the strategies employed by high net worth individuals with the masses. She believes healthy conversations around wealth, including knowing where you are today, where you want to go, and how you will get there. So perfect timing for our conversation. But I also want to let you know, in addition to being this financial powerhouse and pioneer, try to include those two together, she is also a former national figure skater who brings tenacity and bravery to her role as a founder. A problem solver by nature, her international experience in engineering, capital markets, and wealth management helped her rebuild the financial plan from the ground up. So with that, welcome to the show, Kristine. So excited to have you and to jump into this conversation.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. All right. So we're going to get into the amazing work that you are doing over at Untangle Money and how you even, shifted from the multiple career paths that you have had in your short time on earth. But before we get into that, tell us a little bit about, your career journey and some of the catalysts or big life events, if you will, that led you to making the transitions that you've made so far.
Yeah, I started out, so I actually dropped out of high school, which I think a lot of people find surprising, but I skated full time and then I got my GED at night school and then studied engineering. So I had already started on a bit of an untraditional path. Um, I became an engineer. I was actually out in the oil and gas industry here in Canada, so the Texas of the North, and it was during the boom time, and I made lots of money, which is a bit garish to say, but I'm trying to normalize that, right? I think it's important that women do make money and are confident in, uh, saying that they were successful. So I had a small company. I had hired a bunch of my friends. We did a lot of great work. I made quite a bit of money, and I didn't know what to do with it. So I went to a bank and I talked to my bank branch advisor, and it was a really uncomfortable conversation. And I hadn't studied oil and gas engineering. It was just, I had studied something in more of the tech space, but we had just had a bust in that space and oil and gas was booming. So it was just somewhere I could get a job. So I wasn't really passionate about oil and gas, but I was really interested in figuring out how to make my money work for me, because there was something there. I knew I was supposed to do something with it, but I was an engineer. I didn't know. So I started reading all these books and I went back to school and I got an MBA. And then I ended up on Canada's largest trading floor. I became a stock analyst. Then I ended up helping invest money for wealthy Canadians. And then I had children along at this time. And I sort of felt this real career plateau. It was as if suddenly I wasn't the rising star. I wasn't being seen as a high potential employee anymore. I felt like I just wasn't getting traction there. And something happened at work where they wanted to expand their women's initiatives, but they didn't have any meaningful progress to show for them. So they're spending all this money and they weren't getting any meaningful progress. And I was a mom and I was like, really wanted to give back to the world in a way that I maybe wasn't as important for me when I was getting established. And so for the second half of my career, I wanted to give back to this conversation about women and not, pushing that conversation forward so that, I spent my whole life in male dominated spaces. So I was looking at the intersection between women and money. And the thing that I thought I could help with is, financial planning. I looked at my friend. When I invested money for wealthy individuals, they all had a plan. My job was just to execute that plan. But when I looked at my friends, we were all investing, but we didn't really know, like with no end goal, or like there was no plan in place. So it was hard to know what we were doing. So that's how it kind of came about. And then we've learned a lot. I thought it'll be simple. It hasn't been. We learned a lot. We made a lot of mistakes, and we've been really fortunate to be called in by the people we're working with, and telling us, I really felt judged when you said that, or I really didn't feel seen when you didn't include this. Or we've been really fortunate, and we think we have come up with something that really helps women and is making a difference. And we see a 30% reduction in financial anxiety, which is women's number one source of stress. So I feel that I'm doing what I had set out to do, is in pushing that conversation, making the world better. Now I just need to figure out how to get more people aware of it. So
yeah. So when did you actually start Untangle Money?
May 2020. So I had a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 6-year-old at home. And that first year, we probably got 3 months worth of work done. It was it was just not a productive year, but it was an important year for just making sure everybody got through everything with all the uncertainty, and that we were safe and healthy, and managing. So it's been 3 years, but it feels more like 2 and a bit.
Yeah. I want to circle back to that too. So a few gems that you dropped there. So, first of all, like, kudos to you, because obviously your passion towards figure skating caused you to drop out of school, but you didn't stop there, right? Like, you continue that pathway. And then the piece that I love is that while there is a slight social discomfort with talking about money and saying that, we make a lot of money, or you made a lot of money during that time, I like the fact that you were real, vulnerable, and honest, and that you recognize there's still a little discomfort in you saying that, even though you live in this space and you have, allowed others to be super, super successful. I think that that's important to highlight, because, part of, or a big reason why we're having this conversation is so that we can get more women comfortable with having conversations about money, comfortable looking at where they are experiencing discomfort and stress when it comes to money. So thank you so much for modeling that in real life. And it wasn't even planned.
Yeah, it's interesting. We sort of walked into a use case we weren't expecting, which is we talked with a lot of entrepreneurs, and we hear this all the time from women. I don't want to take advantage. I want to be able to help people. And what we help them do is they come in and they make this amount of money, and they're covering all the costs that they need, but they miss the retirement piece. They miss building up a saving or investing for their retirement. And when we show them what it costs, it's almost like it gives them that validation that it's not that they're taking advantage, and they're not, I don't know, there's something there that a lot of female entrepreneurs seem to need to justify their price. And when we show them, and they're like, oh, I really need to raise my prices. And it can be a hard conversation for women, because we do feel this sense of community. We do want to give back. We do want to add value. We don't want to take advantage of people generally. And so it can be challenging to sort of square those two things, success with feeling like you're not good enough, or that someone else has to pay more for that. I think that it can be, I find it fascinating.
Yeah. So just so I understand, you work with entrepreneurs and professionals in the traditional corporate tracks?
We work with regular women. So if how we define that is to work with the wealth management industry. In Canada, the minimum is usually $1 million in investable assets, so that you can get a wealth advisor. Otherwise, you're serviced by the bank branch generally. There are some places you can have a little bit less money, but that's money you can invest with them. And so we would work with anybody who doesn't qualify for that. And sort of probably when you're getting up to the $200,000 in income, you probably need better help, or you'll probably find someone who's building a book of business and they'll work with you. But below that, regular women. We want to give them a better decision-making tool around their money.
Yeah. All right. There's so many places that I could go with this. So, and the other thing that I wanted to touch on that you mentioned during your intro there is that, you had climbed up the ranks in traditional, work environments, and then you had children, and you felt and you experienced this plateau, right? Whether it was real or imagined or whatever, but like you felt it, you were experiencing it. And so I think that's another key point for us to bring up because, when you look at wealth building or you look at long-term, comfort, if you will, with building out whatever that end goal is going to be, more so than men, we as women, we have to step away from the workforce more often, right? And even when we do and we come back and we're swinging, there's still now other considerations that are taking place, right? And chatter in our heads around, am I still good enough? Am I still smart enough and whatnot?
Yeah.
And so there is a hard cost to having to leave the workforce and come back, and reacquaint yourself and reprove yourself and then go out and then come back. And so I think that that's an important thing to highlight for those who are listening, that this is common, and it's a huge part of why the pay gap exists. I mean, there are other reasons, but it's a huge part of why it exists. So I'm curious, as you started to feel like, okay, I'm not able to make the impact that I thought, I could make. And, the environment is also not reflecting back to me, what I would want at this stage. What were some of the things that you worked through or had to think through, or, work mindset work that you had to do to help you get to a place where, one, you were able to build up and maintain your confidence, so that you can recognize what was happening, and then also take that step into, I want to do something different.
Yeah. It was so there's a few things that you're not sure of when you're in the situation, or at least I wasn't sure when I was in it. I didn't know, was it the industry or was it the company, right? Like, was it specific to the organization I was in and its culture, or was it the industry? So I did try a different bank just to see, like, was it maybe just the organization? There were less women at that one. Maybe there's more women at this one, better representation. They seem to be doing better things in the space. They had a women's initiative that was very promoted. And then it was also about, how do I, and I'm sorry, there's a garbage truck. I don't know if you can hear it. How do I mitigate all of the things that I need to be able to do in life? So for me, that's financial. How do I pay for daycare? How do I make my mortgage payments? How do I, feel like I'm not negatively impacting my family? And a lot of people have generational needs, so caregiving, so it can be sandwiched. You might have elders that you're also supporting financially. So how do I find ways to structure my life that this will be a good experience for, and I'm not being detrimental? And so one of those things was, we live in a smaller house. We rent out a basement. That kind of helped us have income that I wasn't generating. Some of my previous investments give us a little bit of cash flow. So I was able to and I'm very fortunate in this way, but we're able to live just kind of comfortably enough that I can do this and take this on. But that was a huge conversation. It took me a long time to sort of, Toronto is it's a really expensive city. It's hard to live in. London, New York, some of these are also, I think it's hard right now in the middle class, right? Food is expensive. Inflation is eating away at what we can do with our money. There's a lot of calls on our dollars and a lot of things to pay for. And I don't know if that's different than when our parents went through, but it certainly feels challenging. So how do you feel like that's all set? And then, imposter syndrome. I don't even know if we want to go into that, but how do I, like, the entire industry is telling you you're doing something wrong. It can really grate on you. So I was so fortunate. We came across the World Economic Forum says that financial planning should look different for men and women because of exactly what we said, babies, different life cycles, different caregiving responsibilities, and we live longer. So, when you get these little moments that really you hang on to as an entrepreneur when you're trying to do something that support and bolster that you're on the right track. And you have to kind of, I think you have to want to take a risk sometimes. You just want to make a change, and if you feel like it's safe to do, you can do it. I think it's even more impressive when people do it and they don't feel safe doing it, because I think sometimes they're not given any options, and they're able to overcome that and still transcend it. So I think I was fortunate, and I hope I answered your question, actually.
Yeah, I have a couple of follow-ups and thoughts there. So, interesting enough, I had a discovery call with, and this, well, it's a client, but during the time of the discovery call, she also was in a male-dominated environment. And, at the time, maybe there were like one or two like above the director level that were women. And while she was very, proficient in her job and excellent in what she did, like, and she kept getting tapped on the shoulder to rise up, she had this resistance because she literally said, I feel like I have a target on my back. I feel like the minute that I step into this higher level role, right, and this more visible role, not only are the expectations going to be different, but now, obviously your being is a lot different, and that shifts. So as obviously you were able to evaluate, like, is it the environment that I'm in? Is it the banking that I'm in? Like, and then you kind of just made the decision that, what, no, it's time to go. It's time to go. But for those who are still in corporate environments and they're feeling that, right, regardless of whether, again, it's real or imagined, and it's because they had to step away for childbirth or other things are happening in the organization, just knowing what you know today, like, what advice would you give them in terms of just first steps on moving just a little bit past all of the fear and all of the inner critic that's happening in the moment?
So the first thing I really want to say to all those women is, please don't think it's in your imagination. There's a lot of research that supports what you feel. And there's a lot of research that you can look at the glass cliff that shows that it's true, right? There is, and especially if you experience intersectionality, sometimes you have to not only be the only woman, but the only person of color, or the only gay person, or like and those communities are not only looking to you to advance the cause. So there's pressure of being the perfect only, or the perfect one of a few. But then also there's this idea that maybe you didn't earn it, and all these other things, tokenism. And so please know that despite all the gaslighting you're probably going to hear and all the imposter syndrome, you are probably feeling something that is actually true. And that took me a long time to come to realize that I wasn't just not perfectly contorting myself into being the imperfect employee. And then I think there's things you can do while you're still working to test what you're doing. So for me, I went to hackathon. It was a woman's focused hackathon. And it was like I had found my people. It was like, and so that was a weekend event that I could go to. And so maybe you could start a newsletter or start a Facebook group, or I don't know, find a small way to test whatever it is. Maybe it's informational interviews with people that in a different, industry, but they still use your role. So like finance, ops, HR, marketing, every business needs these. So a lot of our skills are transferable. So maybe it's having conversations with people inside that industry that you're thinking might be better fit, and making sure that you're, learning about it, getting the ins and outs, finding out what's the same, what's different, and so finding ways to almost like bolster yourself, but without a lot of risk on the table. So doing that slowly. That's where I would start. And if you can afford a coach, some of my greatest moves came during times when I had professional coaches. And sometimes I think it's so funny that I had a coach most of my life as a skater. Why do I think it's so weird to have a coach as a professional? And so I this one woman I heard speak, she's a powerhouse in Canada, and I just love the way she addressed the Me Too question. And I kept talking about it, and my coach said, I really want you to go tell her what it meant to you and ask her to be your mentor. And I only did it to satisfy my coach. I didn't do it thinking like she must get time. I don't know, like whatever. So I was like, I just wanted to come back to my coach and say, I did it. I'm coachable. And the woman came back. She said, I'm happy to give you half an hour for coffee. Let's sit and then see where it goes. And she's still a mentor of mine today. And so, yeah, like finding what I don't know, it's a bit of self-discovery, finding what you need and then finding small ways to move in that direction. And it bolsters you. You feel like I'm doing something. And then the politics become less important because you're kind of opening windows because you see all the doors are closed. Like find your windows and open them.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And actually, you made the way for the next question that I was going to ask is really around, some of the internal work that needs to get done, right? When you're making a transition, I mean, it could be from, one level to the next level, or it could be you're moving from one job to another job or city or whatever the case may be. But I think the thing that I've recognized within myself and certainly within my clients, and just the space that we're in, right? We call it coaching, consulting, whatever it is. There's not enough talk around the growth process and what that looks like. We're always excited about the end result of growth or the end result of moving and taking a leap into something new. But there's a deep ditch that happens before we get to that mountaintop. So I was going to ask,
Yeah.
I'm curious, especially for you, having been on the mountaintop and having to reconcile within yourself that like essentially you're starting all over again. What were some of the support mechanisms you had in place or that you put in place to help you through that process, in addition to planning, in addition to your husband, in addition to like all of the financial pieces? Like what were some of those more emotional or mental and even spiritual things that you had in place?
Well, I've done a lot of counseling. I think I was pretty early on that. I struggled with depression a lot, especially with ending. And I think it's coming out that's not so unique, or it's pretty common amongst athletes. You have such a strong identity tied to being an athlete and a high performer, and I found it really easy to make decisions, right? So we're like, am I going to have a beer? Probably not. It's not going to help me. It's not going to improve me as an athlete. Am I going to smoke? Probably not. Right. And like, am I going to make good food choices? So it was a real strong North Star. It was a real identity that was tied in. And so I did a lot of work around that. And I think so if you have access to a therapist of any kind, there's so many different styles, there's so many different people. I think most of us have some sort of trauma in our system or some sort of places where we overreact when we shouldn't, I think that there's just a lot of great work that can be done around mental health and working on yourself. And to your point, right? I think we get excited about standing on top of the mountain and sometimes we forget that when you zoom in, there's depths, pits of despair, right? And like just protracted pits of despair that you have to climb out of. And the goal isn't that to avoid the downs. The goal is to come out higher than when you went in, right? It's like it could be a long plateau, but if you're here, that's still movement in the right direction. So it's not about culminating with some end goal. It actually, in everything in life is a journey, right? It's moving positively in a different direction in a way that is important to you. So we talk about planning. And we call it a financial plan. And for some reason, people are like, I don't know what that is. And I'm like, but if you were to eat healthy, you put a meal plan together. If you wanted to run a marathon, you might have a training plan. It's no different with your money. And then when you come back to sort of tools that you put in place for being an entrepreneur, it's similar, right? You put a target, and some of them are completely unrealistic and you have no idea. And you put plans in place to get there. So what did I specifically put in place? I definitely kept working on my mental health. I definitely look for ways to have outlets. Exercise is important for me. And I've, having the mentor, having a coach from times, I don't have one right now. It's a bit too expensive for us. But I do have mentors and advisors that I've met in the ecosystem. So they kind of serve a similar purpose. And it's, if you can finding your tribe or finding places that inspire you, because sometimes the neat thing about the internet is now we can find people that can help us feel community even when we're isolated. So that's great. But finding the ones that work for you and leaving the rest behind, right? Find what works, leave the rest. So that you can be inspired in moments when you need that, right? Like I would be totally lying if I said it's been a great journey the entire way. Like there are days where I don't want to get out of bed. I feel like I've failed everyone. I feel like a giant neon loser sign on my forehead, and you just feel like it's not working. And then randomly or serendipitously something comes up and people are like, oh, someone says something nice to you. Like this the one that I remember the most right now is still this woman saying, I don't think you understand how much you've changed my life. And like I've said it a few times because I hear it a lot when I need to. And so it's just, little things can really move the dial a lot, and being graceful with ourselves and knowing that we're on a journey. And we may never get to the top of that mountain, but maybe we were never supposed to be there. Maybe we were supposed to go a different way anyways.
Yeah. Self-compassion is huge on this journey, whether you're an entrepreneur or not. If you have a passion and a desire to do something great, to leave and to make an impact or leave a legacy in the world, it's going to take a lot, and it's going to take a lot from you, and it's going to require that, as you're pouring out, you are also allowing other people or other things to pour back into you so that you can continue on the journey to make the impact. So a couple of things that you said that I just want to touch upon, and then I want to talk about how, specifically based on the clients that you've worked with, where you see, the pitfalls and where you see like the light bulbs turning on and people being very successful. But before we get into that, one of the things that you said earlier was around, the women entrepreneurs, like, or even when they come to you for financial planning and feeling that resistance around, looking at the money and deciding, right? And just being like, oh, this is just enough. I have a theory on why that is. And part of that is because of my own journey towards healing around money, traumatic experience and whatnot. And some of my clients, part of what, as I look back on my journey, part of what kept me from, charging what I should have been charging, or even getting to a place where I was consistently looking at my money, is because it required me to put that mirror up. It wasn't just about money. It was my entire identity. It was my self-worth. It was all of these things were tied to it. And so based on my experiences, like I didn't even realize as a full-blown adult that I had all of these traumatic wounds tied to this inanimate, well, I mean, it's not inanimate, but this external thing. And so, going through that healing process, it forced me to do a couple things. It forced me to look at myself and take accountability for the decisions that I had made, right? Knowing or unknowing, consciously or unconsciously, whatever it was, just looking at it without judgment and taking accountability that I made these decisions. It also forced me to have to look at my parents and my caretakers and look at how they manage money and the messages that they, transferred onto me about that. And, in that process in itself was a healing process, because then I could separate my beliefs, my actions, and my experiences from theirs, and realizing that a lot of what I had been taught, I was just recreating it based on their experience. And, I'm an immigrant from Haiti. My parents were born in Haiti, right? So it's like you're coming from almost really nothing, right? And so I didn't realize that even though I was like successful in corporate and all these other things, that I was still carrying a lot of their messages. And then the third part of that, right, was first taking accountability, two, separating myself from their beliefs around it. And then the third was having to make the decision that I had to draw a line in the sand between me and my family. And that doesn't mean like completely disconnect. Like I'm not talking to you because I had money issues. No, but it was more of like, I have to draw a line in the sand because what the generations, if you will, before me believed in, thought about, like were exposed to, I had to draw a line in the sand and say, I'm not doing that. And as communal individuals and humans, that is a hard thing to do. Like
Yes.
our entire like life existence is about, being accepted and being part of the tribe and everything else. And to have, it's one thing when the tribe kicks you out, right? We're surrounded by all this fear in our subconscious about being kicked
Mhm.
out from the tribe. But it's another when you have to make the decision to walk away from the tribe. And that's painful. And it's a
Yeah.
process, and
Yeah.
it's uncomfortable, and no one talks about it. So oftentimes, especially when I was in my thing, you think you're crazy. You're like, how could money be the thing that is creating all of this havoc? Not even outside. I mean, it does affect outside, but inside of me. And so, I think it's important that we highlight that piece, because obviously you went through it, right? And you're working through the process. You're supporting people through it, that, when they're listening to this, they're not just like, oh my gosh, here they are talking about money again. And it's just
Yeah.
like, no, actually, it's bigger than money. It's your identity. It's your self-worth.
Yeah.
It's all of
Yeah. Yeah.
these things that are intrinsic that,
Yeah.
often you don't see.
Yeah, it's so powerful. There's actually a course up here called The Trauma of Money that I'm hoping to take in the fall, because I've heard nothing but great things, and I think everybody has trauma around money. Rich, poor, middle, I think we all it's so important to our ability to you can't do any like, everything relies on money. So it's so important to our livelihood that I think we all have trauma around it. It's and to degrees. Um, One of the things that's super interesting, if you look in the research, we say we reduce financial anxiety in women by 30%. You can't make it go away completely. You could be Bill Gates and he still has anxiety around money, but it may not be the same anxiety about the same thing that you and I have anxiety around money. But you can't get rid of that anxiety completely. And that's just to show how deeply embedded it is in our lives, right? It is the transfer of wealth, or not wealth. That's how it's like I can't barter for everything, right? Not everything that I need can be bartered for. So we have that intermittent thing. And so I think I'm really glad you brought that up about generational wealth, and also the women's desire to take care of their community. There are so many women that we see that, and at the end of the day, we do not judge. So this was something that I had to learn. We just give you the information, hope that you make and we give you some guidance. But in the end, it's ultimately up to you to make the decision. So we've met a lot of women who, you know, put all this money into their children and don't have anything left over for themselves. We see that time and time again, where they literally run out of money 5 years after they retire. They're just probably not going to retire, and they're paying for their kids' education, and they're paying. And I actually, there's nothing wrong with that. It's their money. They need to do what they want in life. But in terms of being able to take care of yourself, it can be, you're limiting your options to do that later, because it's harder to work when you're older. It's just going to be more challenging to have a livelihood, and so you're depending then on your child to maybe take care of you. And I do want to distinguish multi-generational homes from what we typically see here in the West. We tend to get, get all these assets and then decumulate. So we tend to build up all these savings and then we spend them in retirement. Multi-generational homes are actually much smarter. And we see it a lot more here in Canada, kids living with their parents much later, kids building like bunkies for their parents in their backyards, laneway housing and things like that. These multi-generational lives, because it is sometimes the only way to make the money work. And then you're not seeing this like, you know, uh, accumulation and decumulation of money. So it is a really great way to live. But when I talk about the kids and the taking care of others and not putting yourself first financially, I'm not talking about multi-generational living. I'm talking about, just not ensuring that you have enough for yourself. And then you are kind of at the mercy of other people and what they choose to do. So hopefully they choose to do the right thing by you. But that's a different conversation. I'm
Yeah,
not sure if
yeah.
that's quite what you meant, but um, the other interesting thing we see is that the difference in financial literacy between men and women isn't as big as we think. And most of us have pretty much the same amount of literacy, right? Most of us were kind of taught the same thing, which is pretty much nothing. So I don't know where we like, oh, you find it on the floor. Oh, here's the financial literacy. I must have dropped it. Like, I don't know where we thought we were supposed to get it from and why we think men are so much better at it. But women are better savers. We're better at investing. All the stats play this out. But all the messaging that we get is that men are better. And when you look at the messaging that they get in men's magazines versus the money messaging that's in women's magazines, the men's magazines are all about building wealth, empire building, aspirational. You can buy that car, get that watch. You can, you should be the breadwinner. Women, it's all about stretching your dollar, giving it away to charity, supporting your community, philanthropic. It's not about wealth building. And that's part of why I try and make that decision to say, I like having a lot of money and I want to make a lot of money, and I have made a lot of money in the past, because that's not messaging we hear for women, from women, about women and what women are supposed to do. We're supposed to lead all the nonprofits and take care of our family, and we internalize that and then we action on that. So again, we're not telling you what to do. We just want you to have all the information so you can make a more informed decision about what you're going to do.
Love that. Really great points. Something that I wrote down when you mentioned it in terms of men having anxiety about women. I was reading this book. I can't remember her name right now, but it's The Worthy Project. And I'll be sure to include that in the show notes as well. So in that, she talks about how Warren Buffett is known to, go to McDonald's every single morning. And depending on how the market is doing, will, that's what he's going to use to make the decision of whether or not he's going to order his regular breakfast. And so we all know, like, this man is not hurting for money, but literally, like, if the market takes a downturn, we're talking a few dollars here. Like, he will not spend the few dollars. But if it's high, then he'll get his normal breakfast, which is it's just crazy to me. But at the same time, it just highlights more so, not necessarily men versus women, but just like human nature, and where we all have challenges, where we all suffer. And, while society, to your point, paints this picture of like, men are just super confident with money, like they all got it and all that other stuff, that's great, but that's not necessarily true. And I think I can't remember if it was Janine Furpo or a previous guest during the series, but they mentioned that in 2030, women are expected to be, we will have the wealth, we will have ownership of the wealth. And so this is the time now where, we need to really start having these conversations, and not only just having these conversations, but taking action. And so when you said earlier, when I asked you the question, when you started the business and you were like, May of 2020 of all times, I think that was probably the best time for you to start this, because it created, between the pandemic and between the Great Resignation and between social uprising, everything, it was almost like a blanket had been lifted and exposed all of the issues in society that we knew existed, but it was easier to ignore when we were like busy in our daily hustle and bustle. And so I think that, like, during that time, that's when I felt activated, if you want to call it, where it was just like, okay, here's room to start, building and rectifying to an extent some of these underlying things that have been there, that have been holding us back, women in particular. And so through that, like, I'm doing it through leadership and through other means. But for you, the call was around money and education and wealth building. And I feel like, obviously, everyone who's been on the series, they felt that call as well. And other powerful women are doing that in different spaces. So I know you were like, oh, May 2020, but I honestly feel like that was the time for you to start it.
Yeah. And I don't think I could have waited any longer anyways. I don't know. I like how you called it a calling. It felt like it. It was hard to, it's interesting. Once you start making these small tests, then and you get a few positive signals, it can feel almost impossible to ignore. Like, some people say it's brave, and I'm like, it's not really brave. You're just following your instincts to some degree.
Yeah. And literally, when you ignore it, because I've tried to ignore it, your entire
Yeah.
life will be turned upside down until you answer.
Yeah. Yeah, it was like, I think it was hard to ignore. It was really hard to not try, at least try. Because there's a wonderful quote, I think it was by, is it JFK? The Man in the Ring. And he talks about the critics versus the person who's actually in the ring fighting. And he's like, we should champion the man in the ring who has imperfect information and imperfect understanding, and is making the best decisions they can at the time, and at this pace that it's coming. It's easy with hindsight and the web to sit there and be like, well, that was silly, like and it's a really wonderful quote. And I feel like when you're the entrepreneur, or you're the leader, or you're the first and the only, you are the person in the ring, and it's so easy for people to field criticism from their ivory tower, or from their like armchair. But I I I feel like sometimes you just have to do it, and critics be damned. You
Yeah.
mentioned Warren Buffett as well, and he has one of my favorite money quotes of all time, which is, "If you take care of the pennies, the dollars will take care of themselves." So, or look after the pennies, the dollars will care of themselves. And it's not about a scarcity mindset. So, one thing we really want to be careful of is we don't want to create a scarcity mindset. I think it's easy to do with women, and we hear a lot about, like, we hear our spending's frivolous. We get a lot of these signals that we spend money terribly, and it's not true. But so we want to make sure that you discover your joy, and you like, what is it that when you spend money, you feel good? And then focus on that. Try and maybe even spend a little more on that, because it's kind of like fat to nutrition, right? Like, we need fat to be satiated. We need joy in our spending to be satiated. Like, otherwise, we know from research, we just keep spending. If we spend on stuff and it doesn't float our boat, we will just keep spending that money, and we'll get into debt and trouble. So you want to align your spending with what brings you joy. And I think that part is missing from Warren Buffett's quote. So when you're watching the pennies, or you're watching your daily spending, make sure you're getting that return on all the work you're doing, right? There's no point working if we're not going to be happy in life. And just make sure that you're spending your money there, and try and get everything else free or cheap, or don't get it at all, right? Like, figure out what drives you, or like, I mean that, like, what lights you up inside. It could be food, it could be clothes, it could be makeup. I don't care. Just find what is it, and then focus on that. And if you have a lot of them, then you got to like focus on one or two, and then try and get the rest for free. And it's something I think is really missing in all these financial literacy things, where don't have the avocado toast, don't have the coffee. If you really love the coffee, and that makes you feel when I first had my coffees, I felt really professional. It felt like, I'd just been a student. I got this like fancy coffee. It meant a lot to me. It was worth it. So I want people to have comfort in knowing that the way you spend your money isn't wrong. You might just need to focus it more, right? Focus
Yeah.
it. And then that way you're not spending all of the money, because you can't find that joy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing that I would add to that too is that because there's such an emotional attachment to money, that we're also very conscious and checking in on what are the emotions that are coming up, or what are the emotions that are driving our spending, right? Because it's one thing to have a budget, and it's one thing to go in and do the spreadsheets and do all those other things, but there are seasons in our lives where maybe things aren't going right, and so we're trying to avoid the emotions of everything that's going on. And now that's reflecting back in, okay, I'm going to buy this course, and I'm going to take this course, and I'm going to do this, and da, 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 da. So like, it doesn't even have to be as explicit, or, you know what I mean, as pronounced as like, I'm just going on these shopping sprees to Nordstrom's. Like, I think that's the piece for entrepreneurs, women, whoever, and because we're so intuitive, women in particular, because we're so intuitive, that there is the tactical or strategic aspect around managing your money and building your wealth, but you have to look at wealth, or I advise people to look at wealth holistically, that it is emotional, spiritual, mental, physical, it is financial as well, it's relational. So we can always identify when things aren't going well in a particular part of our lives, like that's
Yeah.
when you do that check-in to say, okay, well, where else is this showing up?
Yes.
So I mean, that's more time than we have to spend
Yeah.
on this, but I think that's the whole beauty of having these conversations, because it's multidimensional. It's not
Yes.
just women need to pay more attention to money, or women need to negotiate more, or women need to, do this. It's holistic.
Yeah.
And so hopefully for those of you who are watching live or who are listening, you've taken some tidbits away in terms of the tactical and the practical things that you need to do to get to a place where you're building your confidence around money. But I would also
Mhm.
encourage you, during this conversation, and I've said this on the previous shows of the series, check in with yourself, check in with your own body. Are you feeling resistance? And did your chest tighten up when we started talking about money? Did you feel it? Did you feel it in your stomach? Were there parts of your physical body, your emotions, whatever, that felt uneasy? Because that is a sign. That is a sign that there is room for you to grow in that space. So, look, if you're new to the series and you haven't been listening, like, go back and listen to all of the shows, because there's wisdom and there's knowledge being shared on how to manage everything externally. And I think that
Yes.
that's important. And I've had a couple of guests who have talked about some of the internal workings. In
Yeah.
order for us to really shift this narrative
Yeah.
around money, around women, around wealth, around our comfort with it, we have to be willing to examine all parts of us as it relates to our relationship with money, so that come 2030 and beyond, we're not squandering it away, or we're not looking around like, what do I do with this? I don't know. Like, and we're again abdicating our power in society.
I love that word, abdicating. And so one of the things that we definitely talk about, and I think is missing often in the finance industry, is what we teach often. The theory is the mathematical input. It is one input in the decision-making process. The part that's overlooked is the emotional part. There's one of the things that women can really do to help themselves with money is we tend to sit on too much cash. It's a depreciating asset, but we see it as safety as well. So, and we don't necessarily see the investment as safe. So one of the things that people say is women just need to invest more money. And what we say is the emotional side is what it is. Let's say, I'm making up numbers, 30,000. The mathematical need is 3,000. Hopefully there's an envelope of opportunities. So you can feel, you can get the mathematical input, you can get the emotional input, and within that, use those 2 points to make the decision instead of just the one or just the other. These are insufficient on their own because they don't address both parts. So I love when you say you feel it, because there's a reason why we usually don't do things that much in our own worst. Like we're intuitive. You nailed it. We tend to be slower to buy some things, which is actually really clever because we have less money, right? We have less of it. So we need to be more judicial when we spend. There's just so many things that we do so well intuitively. And I hate when the finance industry is like, you're doing it wrong. And you're like, no, it's just another data point, right? It's just another piece in a bunch of different things in the stage of the life, in the chapter of the life that you're in, that help inform the decision, and you're going to make the best one you can at that point. My fear is that we just don't get that input, or we're given it in such a distasteful way that we ignore it, or we don't discount it, and then we're not able to make the best decisions for ourselves. So I love everything you said there. It's super important.
Yeah, I mean, having to walk the journey, right? Like there are the lessons, and I think that's the last thing that I'll close with as it relates to this, that it is a process and it is a journey. So as you're listening to us, we don't have it all figured out, right? And we're figuring it out as we evolve in our consciousness and our awareness, and also as we heal from our own, money wounds, if you will. We're learning new things. So, for those of you who are listening or who are watching, my encouragement to you is, if any of this has resonated with you for the last 3 months or so, and you feel like, all right, there's a tug, there's a pull, there's a call, whatever it is, that this is an area that you need to, maybe get serious about, or maybe just take a little bit more action or inquire about more information. You know, I've brought on 13 amazing women who are experts in this space, anywhere from, you know, salary negotiations to wealth planning to dealing with your money wounds and everything in between. So definitely reach out to the women who have been on the show. I'm sincerely grateful and humbled that they said yes to coming on and sharing their wisdom. And one of the things that has been resounding throughout this entire series, and again, we know this, but it bears repeating, is that all it takes sometimes is to just ask. And you highlighted that with your example with the mentor that your coach challenged you to reach out to. Because sometimes we'll sit there and we'll talk ourselves out of getting support. We'll be like, oh, this person is too busy, they won't do this. And most of the people who are in this space, and you said it too, most of the people, we have a heart to help. Yes, it's a business. Yes, we need to charge. Yes, we have pets and children and everything else that need to eat, right? But we also have a heart to serve. We have a heart to help. We have a heart to inform so that the generations after us have, you know, a better experience, if you will, to whatever extent that they can. So please don't talk yourself out of, or at least if you catch yourself talking yourself out of reaching out to any one of us, you know, please listen to this, bypass that feeling, and just reach out. You never know what connections you'll make. You never know what door it'll open for you. And if this is your time to really, really master your money or master your mindset around money, then get the help, get the support. Otherwise, you know, the consequence of that is a year later or 2 years later or 3 years or 5 or however many years, you'll be stuck in the same place. And we as a society cannot afford to have women sitting in ignorance and or abdicating their responsibility when it comes to money. Were you gonna say something?
Well, I just love the word abdicate, because I just think that is my biggest fear, is that when you don't understand, like I feel like there's a financial literacy tax, right? When you don't understand your finances enough, and you don't have to be an expert, but you just need like a baseline, then I think you pay a tax because someone or something or the system takes advantage of you. And I like that idea of abdicating that responsibility. If that is what ultimately happens when we don't take care of ourselves in this way. It's the perfect word, and I've never heard it put in this context before, and I just love it.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I want to be respectful of your time. I know we could talk for hours over here. So I just want to get through the blitz section with 3 key questions that I've been asking all of my guests here. So, you know, first question: knowing what you know now, if you could go back to a younger version of yourself and give her a piece of advice that you think would have been a game changer, what might that be?
You only gain experience when you make mistakes. You don't only, but like some of the best lessons you're going to learn is when you make mistakes. It's not about not making the mistakes. It's about figuring out how you overcome the mistake or repair the mistake or fix the mistake or move on from the mistake. That is, I think I spent so much, like that perfectionism. I spent so much time trying to be perfect and avoiding mistakes that I missed some of the lessons that happened when I made them, and I grew. Part of that journey thing again.
I love it. And as we future forecast years, decades from now, and you're looking at, you know, the impact that you've made in the world, what do you want the narrative to be?
I want to change the world of finance for women by giving them the decision-making tool so they can make the best decisions for themselves. I just don't think we get enough information. And I think it leads us to make choices that aren't in our best interest. And I think it keeps us unpowerful. I think it gives other people power over us because we end up not having enough at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. That power is just another thing that has just been resonating in my spirit. So I think the next series is going to be around embracing power, or even just healing our relationship with what power is and how we can demonstrate it. So thank you for bringing that up as a great little seed for those of you who are listening or watching. So be on the lookout for that. And then the last question is, or second to last question, I believe readers are leaders, right? A lot of what has helped me heal around money and, break through some of the limitations and traumatic things that I had experienced was through reading. I'm curious, are there any books in this space that have been pivotal for you in terms of your ability to move from corporate to starting your business and now supporting others?
So the one that helped me discover gender design was called Invisible Women by Caroline Criada Perez. She talked about how if we disaggregate gender in our data, we'll actually get two distinctive peaks, but we tend to under survey women, and we design around, and we don't disaggregate, so we design around the man's peak, and that has a lot of unintended consequences. Katrine McCall talked about mother of invention and who fed Adam Smith. I might have that one quite wrong, but Adam Smith is like the father of economics. And he talks about the economic man, but he lived with his mom his entire life, and he completely left his mom out of the economic theory. And she thinks that if women had written economic theory, it would be a lot more collaborative because we wouldn't be fighting each other for resources. We would have been like, hey, do you want to share? So that's a fascinating book that talks about like how women have been left out of the economic narrative. Or she has two fantastic books. And then there's a podcast called The Story of Women that focuses on books written by women in this space. And I found all of them inspirational. Farida D is one that I found the most, is an author I found the most touching. She's an Arab feminist, and her first book is called The List of Shit That Made Me a Feminist. And she blows my mind with her conviction around what is fair and right, and how she's unapologetic about it. So those are some sources that I love reading. I read a lot. Sorry, it was hard to nail it down to just one. Sorry about that.
Yeah. So curious, what was the name of that second book?
Katrine McCall she had the mother of invention talks about how like string was actually an industrial revolution, but it was very female. So if you think of basket weaving, fish netting, and things like that. So that's in one book. It talks about how that was left out. And then Who Cooked Adam Smith's Dinner was the other book by her, talking about economic man and how women were really left out of the philosophy and building blocks of economic theory and how we just ignored them. And I think, there's probably other people we've ignored too, and other groups that weren't, the people doing the battle, they were supporting.
Yeah.
And it's just well done, because it makes you realize that a lot of this stuff is just theory and it's someone's work, but it can also be wrong.
Right. And then so last question, for those who are watching live or who are listening to the show when this gets released, if they want to connect with you, if they want to learn more about Untangle Money, or they just want to, ask a question, what's the best way for the listeners to reach out to you?
Yeah, we're at Untangle Money on most socials that we're on. You can just reach out to me. Probably easier than spelling my name is hello@untangle.money. It comes to me. And then the website untangle.money, it all leads to me as well. And you can learn more about what we're doing there and sign up for a newsletter, and you'll get us in your inbox a couple times a month.
Okay, awesome. We will be sure to include the books and the book links, as well as Kristine's information, so that you can connect with her. You can reach out. Obviously, if you're on LinkedIn, she's here on LinkedIn. So go ahead and just click and reach out and let her know that you heard her on the She Leads Now podcast. So with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up and end here. I can't say thank you enough to the 13 amazing women who said yes to the call and who showed up week after week and gave their best and shared their wisdom and their knowledge, a lot of it hard earned, but shared their wisdom and their knowledge with the same intent as me, to help as many women stand in their power, stand in, their capacity, their identity, as wealthy, if that's what you want to be, as leaders, and of course, women who are making impact in their larger community. So with that, thank you for those of you who have tuned in. Be on the lookout for more information with regards to the next series. And I'm always available if you have questions, if you have comments, if you want to learn more about the show or even the work that I do. Please feel free to reach out. You can do so at support@sabinegideon.com. With that, have a wonderful rest of the day, and we will be back soon. Take care.
Bye.